Welcome to Generations, a show which helps people 50 and better lead happy, healthy, and productive lives. Here's today's moderator, Gloria Van Demeltrot.
Hello. Welcome to Generations, the Roundtable Edition. I'm Gloria Van Demeltrot and happy to be with you. Our co-hosts today are Karen Risette. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you so much. I love talking about art, so this is a perfect program to be here for.
Wonderful, wonderful. And we have Ellie Freed. Hi, Ellie. Good to see you.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Great. And we also have Nadia Giordana. Isn't this a great time? Looking forward to today?
I am too. You know, I met our guest years ago, so I'm excited to see what she's been doing since the last time I saw her, maybe 25 years ago.
This should be fun. That brings us to our wonderful guest today, Edie Abnet. Edie is a watercolor artist from the Stillwater area, and we're delighted to have you, Edie.
I'm happy to be here. Happy to be here, Gloria. It's
Terrific.
always fun to talk about art with people who are enthusiastic.
Yes. Well, maybe we'll start a little bit with you telling a little about how you got started in watercolors, perhaps. And I'm sure our co-hosts will have no problem asking you questions along the way.
I was always interested, of course, from the time I was a child, in just drawing and painting. But after I got married and had children, I didn't have a studio, and so I was painting basically in the kitchen or in a room where little children would be. So I decided that watercolor would be about the safest media. And so I found an artist named Judy Blaine out of White Bear Lake. She was doing a series of watercolor classes in a little church. So all I had, the only equipment I had, was praying watercolors and a miserable little notebook. And I went there, although I had been doing paintings on it. In fact, I was selling paintings with that kind of material, but I would sell them for like $12, $18. At any rate, when I went to the class and I was doing work, Judy came over and said, she stood there for a while and she said, you know, it is pretty amazing what you can do with praying, but at some point you're going to have to make the jump and invest in something more professional. So I did, and it was a great experience. It was very interesting. We watched programs on watercolor artists from all around. It was at that time, which was essentially 40-some years ago, it was translucent watercolors was the only thing people really were studying. But she showed us films from watercolorists from California who were using mixed media and everything to create paintings, you know, specifically talking about the fact that you are creating and there should be no rules. This is a personal
That
thing.
was the question that I was going to ask you about. I read about it online, and I had not known before that you could mix watercolor with other mediums. Talk a little bit about what those other mediums are and how you do that.
Well, I think that my strong point is drawing. And the pencil, graphite, and white paper was always exciting for me. And what I particularly wanted to do was enhance that process, that drawing process. And what I learned was that there were many things that you could do to create depth and character on the paper. You didn't have to use impasto. I mean, oils you can build up almost sculpturally and score and have all kinds of means to create an exciting kind of piece of work. But you're limited with watercolor. You are limited to a degree. You're limited, you know, not if you have a 300-pound paper, which is just a thicker handmade paper. But these artists from California were scratching their surfaces with things like Brillo pads. and scoring them with a palette knife or a razor. And then they would take ink and splash it on there and create stains. And it was also a process of really becoming intimate with your pigments, your colors, and choosing, which was important and what I learned, to stick specifically with one kind of a brand, because you have to understand the process of watercolor is understanding how those colors are going to meld together and react. And every brand is a little different. Every color, even if they all say cerulean, if you're using a Grumbacher's over a Winsor Newton, it does different things with your umber colors.
Oh, wow.
Interesting.
If you tell us a little bit, you talked about the dangers of some of the paints. I had no clue that oil paints or other things were of any danger or not good for breathing in.
Or
Could you
toxic,
talk,
or-
yeah,
Absolutely.
talk a little
Oh,
bit
sure.
about that?
I mean, if you look at pigments, they are listed, certain blues, certain reds. I mean, these are chemicals after all.
Oh, okay.
And any exposure long-term, well, we could, speculate on what it's done to me over the years, but at any rate, yes, there are toxic components to chemicals that you're going to work with. And oils specifically have much more fumes, so more dangerous in that regard. Although now they make a lot of pigments, oils. Acrylics are a water-based pigment, but oils specifically, you can buy water-based oils now.
I didn't
so that
know
you,
that.
Yeah, so that you do not have to deal with the odors, the
The
smell.
odors,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly, exactly. In fact, what was interesting, when I first started with oils, I was getting headaches all the time, so I had to get away. And then I started using acrylics, and then I became really fascinated because of the extensive involvement of drawing and watercolor. And I think it was also sort of the historical aspect, that Impressionism, when you study classically the historical aspects of Impressionism or the classical artists, they all became fascinated with Japanese art and the simplicity of those fresh watercolors. And watercolor is, pretty fresh, and that emotional response that you get right now. I never was one to fuss over a painting for days at a time. It just wasn't in my nature. I always had to work on a couple at a time,
Interesting. I remember reading something about you that holding your interest, you're working on something, and that you need to really concentrate on it and work on it, and that's your joy. But if you take your mind off it, you'll start watching a bug climbing up a wall and forget about it. Is that?
Well, actually, what I think that referred to was if I painted outside, plein air.
Oh,
And I was never interested in doing that because it was distracting for me.
Okay, yeah.
I'm a studio painter. I have to be up there. I have to focus on what I'm doing. But probably, truth be told, I have some ADHD. And so it was always, there was, when I was young, and creating, it was extremely exciting, very exciting. And it would and before I would get to that magic moment, you can be creating, and something isn't happening the way you want it to. And I would get so distraught sort of internally about that I would have to put it aside and start on something else. And what I learned to do to not be overwhelmed by those emotions or getting too frustrated by one piece is I would draw up at often 4 pieces at a time. And I would start painting in series. you know, also it was for me, I didn't want those pieces to look alike. And I was pushing myself always to say, all right, maybe I'm doing 4 irises here, but every one of them are not going to be alike. They will speak to each other, but they won't be alike. And I always, when talking to students, and maybe I've, you know, gone off the track here, what you had asked me, but about what is my process. And I would always compare it to extemporaneous jazz, because you are so the paintings are like you're listening to a musician over here and you're listening to another musician over here, and they're speaking to each other and telling the next musician how to go into that next rift. And another thing I heard that, and I could totally relate to that on the level of a painting, I don't sit down, I mean, even if I draw something up, I don't sit down and have a preconceived notion of where I'm going to go with color. I was never interested in the idea of traditional watercolors or the translucent form of, you know, where is your light coming from? Save your whites. That never interested me in that. I was more interested in design. And so, and also the idea of not creating exactly what you see in front of you, but the way that makes you feel. I was more interested in interpreting my emotional response rather than, you know, a photographic rendition of the light coming through
Which
the
brings out a whole new response from the viewer, too.
That's what I hope for. You know, that's what I hope for. And I want them to look at the piece and say, and which they do, interestingly, people that have bought my things, is I put it here in this room, and every day I go by and I see something different. And, you know, that's a wonderful thing to hear.
Oh,
you know,
yes,
a
it's
wonderful.
exciting. That we have in front of us some examples of some paintings you've done. And I'm looking at one right now of 3 horses. I think there are 4 horses, and there's a little girl.
Oh, horse's picture, yes,
It is
that's
just
very unique.
beautiful to me. That really is speaking to me.
I
And
like the way you use outline, and I've seen that in other of your art.
Right.
I like that.
I do too.
Well, you know, that goes back to this line in general for me. And I've thought about it over the years, because years ago, I had a instructor, college instructor, say, you know, and I've had this before, say, that's so decorative. And it was sort of a slam, you know, but what's interesting is I realized that I don't remember how it began, other than somebody said, oh, you're trying to cover up your pencil line. Not at all. I don't care if pencil comes through. I don't care what, you know, is showing through. It's all interesting in terms of the vitality, the energy I think that those things give to a painting. It really was how much I love that line. And the other aspect for me was some importance, almost like I had to put an aura around
The
that
idea
object.
of aura, yes.
You know, I realize that,
Almost electrifies it.
you know, and the thing about that too is artists have a hard time being, well, I do, I don't know, analyzing and criticizing of their own work. And it's not for the artist to do that, to understand totally, that's for the critic to do that. But when I've had to write about it or talk about it in teaching it, I realize those are why I do that.
I'm really fascinated by how much sort of self-awareness you have come to learn in your processes, you've done this over the years, and how much you're integrating who you are in your paintings.
You know, that's true with all art. It is, that is why it doesn't, you know, diminish as you age, because you are always looking internally. It is a form of written word. It is looking always internally. And I find that now at my age, there was a great writer, Ursula Le Guin, and she had a series of lectures, and she was talking about women in art, which is very dear, especially our generation, you know, and how it was encouraged or not encouraged. And she talked about how she started working with children, and I always associated with an artist of any media who had to work with children. That's the only ones I could really relate to. I couldn't relate to somehow an artist that didn't have that struggle. But she said, now I'm 75 and I write like a cow in the field, chewing contentedly on its cud.
Oh, fun.
And I got that. Yeah. You know, unfortunately, I went, oh, yes, that's what happens.
I get it, yeah.
You talked about the traditional art. When I was a little girl, I took watercolor classes from a little nun at St. Agatha's Conservatory in downtown St. Paul. She was wonderful, but she did little tiny flowers. Everything was very... When I started studying with Judy Blaine, she wet the whole paper.
Yeah.
She threw color on it.
Exactly.
It was so much fun and so
Yes.
freeing.
You're right.
It just sort of freed all of your creativity.
You know, it's art has been so, we are all creative. Absolutely every
Yeah, and you
one
know,
of
and
us.
it's never too late either. If there
No,
are people our age
absolutely.
that want to take it
Well,
up,
Grandma Moses.
it would, yeah.
That's right.
There's no reason they can't take something up now. I'm
Yeah.
curious a little bit about these performers.
Yes, well, I love action things, and I have family in Washington, D.C., and this time I was meeting them in New York, and when I landed, I had a horrible time getting there. I was 2 days in the airport. There was some storm in Atlanta, so I was 2 days in Minneapolis airport and then put up in a hotel. Anyway, by the time I got there, they had been waiting for a day, and so my son and granddaughter took me immediately to a fabulous Mexican restaurant, and there were live salsa dancers, and this was New York, and this was a larger band of musicians, and it was like the most, I was right there, you know, this close, and they were so amazing. They were so amazing, and they were, you know, so I just took a lot of pictures. It's how I, you know, nowadays.
You mentioned that you take pictures of, you paint from pictures that you've taken or other people have taken, or where do
You know,
get
predominantly
Yeah.
what I take, and for years and years, I thought that was cheating. And so I always had to draw. I took a sketchbook with me, so I always had to draw quick, and that's what, you know, my paintings were based on, those drawings. But now, I don't have the time, you know, or I don't take the time. That's the sad thing. But I have learned, and it took a while actually to learn, because, you know, a photograph is, after all, a piece of art. And it's already composed, it's already, you know, there are things there demanding to be said. And so I had to teach myself how to not be intimidated by that photograph, but instead just take what I was interested. So I took their
You
pictures.
take pictures and then you draw afterwards. You draw from the picture, is that right?
Yes, from the photograph.
Yes, and then paint it.
Sometimes now from the phone.
Yeah.
And I have a question about some of your art that I've seen over the years. And these birds bring it to mind. They're blue jays, I believe they are, at
You know,
least
they
often.
are, but what I like to say is, the animals, the birds, the animals, what I paint, everything, especially the animals, are reflective of, they're being anthropomorphized. They are speaking to something very specific
They've
in
been
me.
some of my favorites over the years.
And so they're not, they're birds, but but the blue jay is, in the crow family, so it has this, and they're an aggressive humanoid kind of a bird. And they have a long neck, they have a big black eye, and they can turn their heads and make gestures that, for me, are very human. So I use them specifically because I can put them in positions.
And everyone is different, but they show up every now and then, a different version of the birds.
The other thing about why I use them is we are completely, of course, this is something else near and dear, why I paint, unaware of nature around us. You drive into the cities, and there are crows sitting up on the wires.
And here are some crows right here.
And there's red-tailed hawks are all along the freeways. And people live in neighborhoods, and the blue jay has become so ubiquitous that nobody looks at it anymore. And yet they know exactly where we are at all times and what we're doing.
How fascinating. Edie, what's the most fun thing about watercolor painting to you? Fun thing.
It's immediacy.
Immediacy.
That I can, that it's, that nervous energy that I have can see a result pretty fast. That it is an extension of that drawing that I love so much. I mean, that's what's fun. I guess, it's hard to say. That's a difficult word when you've been painting for 50 years.
Yeah.
Fun. It isn't, it never was fun. It was serious for me. I would go up into the studio always with a bit of a stomach ache, thinking, can I do this today? Can I do this? It was never there, not that I haven't had fun, just, Gloria, I'm sorry, it just doesn't.
It's all right. Yeah,
it
I
is,
just wondered.
it was, this is fun. I enjoy this. This is fun. But painting was more serious for me. In fact, I mean, even today, even now at my age is what I mean, is when I've been away from the studio for weeks at a time, it takes courage, a bit of courage to go up there and think, because I think, in the back of my head, I'm thinking, I'm not going to be able to do this
Is
anymore.
it a fear of losing it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And not all artists have that. I just specifically, it's like you hear actors talking about, some actors can watch themselves on film, some writers have no problem reading their own work, but others have a problem with that, And so it's just a personal thing. It doesn't, it's just who...
When you're doing it a lot, though, and you don't have that fear and nervousness.
That's the key.
Do you, I don't know if I was thinking about myself and do I have fun? I get so engrossed, it's kind of almost spiritual.
Exactly.
And so it's not, I wouldn't say fun, but it's so engrossing, I forget to eat.
It is fulfilling.
Yep.
Completely fulfilling is what it is. And I don't know why I would have more trouble with the word fun than it is. So it's meaningful. It is challenging. It is going up there. I mean,
It sounds
this
like
painting in itself of the little girl who is.
Yeah,
and
the
with
little
those-
girl
With
with
the
the
horses,
horses.
yes.
Mhm.
That was, a very difficult piece, so that wasn't fun at all.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, once the fun came was when it was done,
Yeah.
and you go,
So you feel
Not
And you
bad.
hear the appreciation of it, too.
then
Yeah,
that's the fun.
yeah. And it sounds like you feel a need to do this. Do you feel compelled to paint? Is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm a better person for if I paint.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I am. I need to work. I need to
How
paint.
fascinating.
How
Do you,
did-
go
Oh,
ahead.
I
Ellen.
was going to say, did your parents encourage you a lot when you were a kid?
Not much.
Mm-hmm.
But I had a grandmother. My father's mother was, she wrote poetry and she painted. And I am named after her because I was born on her birthday.
Oh, okay.
And they didn't, it wasn't like they discouraged, but they weren't, I was born in 1947. And maybe some women were more encouraged and pushed, and and art was very important in the family. And, the aesthetics of art and music specifically, and reading and writing. But the idea that you could be a painter or go to art school was a bit undoing for them, and that I wanted to do that. So it
I
was.
can relate to that, yeah.
Yeah, it was
Fascinating.
very, very,
Not
like
quite.
you can't make a living doing
Yeah,
that.
right.
But then you don't have to because you're going to get married. Somebody will take care of you.
That's the way, that's the way
So-
that it
My
was thought in
father
those days.
was, always encouraged me and said to me, this is a gift from God, and so
That's-
you have to use it.
What I learned, the way I was able to focus on things was, I always thought later on was because I was left alone, because I wasn't encouraged. So how I individually focused on things, it was almost like it was what I needed. That maybe if I had been tenderly, encouraged, I might not have, that
Yeah.
there's enough,
Something would have been
in me,
different.
that I always thought it was the best way, for the way I approached it, the
Edie,
fight.
this has been fascinating. I hate to bring this to a halt. We have many
Oh,
more
my goodness.
questions, and this has been delightful. Thank you,
has.
Edie Abnet, for joining us. This
Thank
has
you
been a
very much.
wonderful
Thank you.
session.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Nadia, Ellie, and Karen. This has been great. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.